What makes the burgers you get at a restaurant or pub so good? They're usually a little over the top. Crisp or crunchy garnishes, aged cheeses, tangy sauces, and they start with a big beefy burger. You can make a burger like that at home. The key is learning how to grind your own beef.
By the way, this is a lesson from ATK Classes on the America's Test Kitchen app and website. With ATK Classes, you'll get access to a wide variety of lessons filled with masterful techniques, helpful videos, and step-by-step photos. From knife skills and making hand-rolled pasta to baking and frosting incredible cakes, all taught by our expert instructors.
To make these burgers, we're going to start with 2 pounds of sirloin steak tips. Before you can actually get to cutting the meat, we need to clear off some of the stuff we don't want in our burgers, and that's the silver skin and any big gobs of fat. I'm going to use my knife to just kind of slip it underneath the silver skin, between the skin and the meat. I want to wiggle it through until it peeks out the other side, and then I'm going to hold that skin down flat and wiggle my knife sideways to create this little flap, and then we'll cut back across this way to remove the silver skin. Don't worry if you don't get all of the bits off at once. It's easier to work in little patches and you'll lose less meat that way. Remember to flip it over and check the other side. And I'm not worried about little bits of fat. They're just going to bring some nice beefy flavor to these burgers, but this kind of translucent connective tissue, that's just going to be tough and chewy, and we definitely do not want that. I really like using sirloin steak tips for burgers at home. The meat is beefy and flavorful, but it's not too gamey. There's usually enough fat to give them beefy flavor, but not so much that you have to do a lot of trimming. Sometimes you see sirloin steak tips sold as flat meat. When that's the case, the meat is usually left in kind of larger pieces, but it's the same cut. So the nice thing about grinding your own burgers is you really know where the meat is coming from. There's going to be another chance later to remove any bits of gristle that are a little bit harder to pull off. So we don't want to eat this, but I'm going to remove it later after I grind. At this point, we want to cut the meat down into smaller pieces, 1/2-inch pieces. That's because we're going to be grinding with our food processor, and we want to make sure the pieces are uniform in size. Otherwise, we won't get a nice even grind. I'm going to start by coming across to create 1/2-inch thick strips like this. Because we're making little pieces, it doesn't really matter which way you start. I could have oriented the meat the other way and it would have still worked. After you make your strips, you want to have a look at them. If they're little like this is a little bit larger than a 1/2 inch, but I'm not too worried. This, though, it is a lot larger than a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to divide that in half, and then we're going to come across and make little 1/2-inch pieces. It really helps to have a sharp knife when you're doing this. There's just a lot less struggle. You end up with neater pieces, and it just goes a lot faster. So I'm just going to continue to cut this up into 1/2-inch pieces. So at this point, in order to grind the meat without a meat grinder, we need to get it to firm up, and we're going to use the freezer to do that. I want to take all of that cubed beef and spread it out onto a rimmed baking sheet into a single layer. That's going to help the meat freeze evenly, which is good. It'll grind evenly if it freezes evenly. I'm just going to go give my hands a wash and pop this in the freezer. It's going to hang out there for about 35 minutes. What I'm looking for is for the edges to be hard, but the cube of meat itself to be pliable. While we're waiting for the beef to firm up, I'm going to put together a quick sauce. This is going to kind of bring that pub vibe and kind of lean into a steak sauce kind of flavor profile. So I'm starting with 3/4 cup of mayonnaise, and to that I've got 1 garlic clove that's been minced, and we'll just pop that right in. And then for that steak sauce vibe, I have 2 umami boosters. This is 2 tablespoons of soy sauce, 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire, and then to just kind of round out those flavors a little bit, I have 1 tablespoon of dark brown sugar. And then last thing, just for a little bit of aroma, 1 tablespoon of minced chives and 3/4 teaspoon of ground black pepper. Now I just want to whisk everything together. You want to kind of go slowly initially, otherwise sometimes the liquids end up getting sloshed out of the bowl. I love this sauce. It's really easy. It's great on all sorts of things. For now, I'm just going to let it hang out until it's time to eat. So here's my beef, nice and firm. You can see that it's really hard at the edges, but when I bend it, it's still pliable, and that's exactly what we're looking for. So I'm gonna grind this meat about a quarter at a time. Just wanna chuck these pieces into my food processor. Oh, and it is useful to take the time to break up any large clumps rather than letting the food processor do it. I know the food processor can, but while it is breaking up those large clumps, it's also grinding the little pieces, and then you end up with something that's a little bit uneven. So that's about a quarter of the meat. We'll pop a lid on, and I'm gonna pulse this. So we're looking for 1/16 of an inch size pieces, and it's gonna take about 35 pulses, so be patient. Every so often, you're gonna wanna open it up and have a little peek in there. Make sure that you don't have any pieces of meat caught on the blade. One thing about stirring really anything in your food processor, that food processor blade, there's a sharp side and a dull side. So sharp side's over here where it's serrated, dull side's over here. If you're gonna push your spatula up against it, push on the dull side. It's just gonna mean your spatula is gonna have fewer scratches and dings and last a lot longer. You can see how nice and fine those pieces are, but they're still distinct. So I'm gonna empty this out and I'll repeat with the other 3 batches. Okay, last batch, all done. Now that the meat's all ground, I want to spread it out, and as I do, I'm keeping an eye out for little bits of gristle and fat that won't be very pleasant to eat. This is why it's okay if you don't do a perfect job trimming early. Now's your time to catch any stray bits that you missed. Now, if you make a lot of burgers from store-bought ground meat, you're going to notice that these burgers are a lot more tender, and that's because this meat has only been ground once. Most ground meat you get at the grocery store, they'll grind it once to break everything down, and then they'll grind it one more time to kind of mix the fat and the meat bits together to get something uniform. All of that grinding brings out the proteins, and it gets a little tacky and clingy. And when you go to cook those burgers, they will tighten up and have this almost sausagey quality, especially if it takes you a long time to shape them. That will not be the case with these. So this is looking really great, but it's also a tiny bit lean. I've got a fix for that though. First, I gotta wash my hands. When you get a burger at a restaurant, usually that burger has a good amount of fat kind of worked in, and that helps those burgers eat nice and rich and juicy. To get that flavor and that texture, we're actually going to use unsalted butter. I've got 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter that I've melted and cooled so that it doesn't warm up the meat, and I'm just going to drizzle it evenly across this sheet pan. I'm also going to season this beef with a teaspoon of pepper. Now, of course, not all burgers have pepper in them, but I like the way the pepper kind of brings a little bit of heat to this patty. The next thing we want to do is to make sure everything is well mixed. I'm going to use a fork, and I'm just going to give this mixture a nice toss. This is going to make sure that my burgers are evenly seasoned and have the same amount of richness from patty to patty. I also want to scrape up any butter that has congealed on the sheet pan. That's looking great. I don't have any big clumps of butter or big patches of pepper. We can now divide this ground meat into 4 because we're making 4 patties. Now, you may have noticed that I didn't salt this meat. There's a really good reason for that. If you salt your ground meat early and let it sit around, especially if you're shaping these burgers and putting them in the fridge for like a day before you cook them, that salt's going to pull some of the protein out of these little clumps of meat, and that protein glues the clumps together. All of this means that when you go to cook and eat that burger, it's going to be a little bit tight, a little bit tough, and so that's why we want to save the salt for when we are cooking the burgers. Now that I have 4 equal portions, we can start shaping. I'm going to start right here, and what I want to do is to form this into kind of loose balls. I find it's easiest to just scooch all the meat together into a nice pile and then scooping it up in my hands like you would if you were making a snowball. And the key here is to not squish it all together into a tight mass. Burgers are tender because they have been shaped carefully so that the meat almost falls apart as you take a bite. And so if you squish the meat together into a tight ball, it's going to eat tough, and that won't be very nice. So loose, gentle packing. Don't worry if any bits fall out. You can always just add them back, and that's it. We'll go ahead and make another ball with the second pile of meat. Okay, last one. Just like all the others, scooch all your meat into a nice round pile, scoop it up gently, and just start shaping it into a ball. Now that we have our 4 balls, we're going to flatten them into patties. Again, you want to be gentle with this. I like to just scoosh it down, and then as you're pressing, you're going to notice cracks kind of forming along the edges. Use your hands to smooth those out so you get a nice round patty and that beautiful shape. What I'm looking for here is a patty that's about 3/4 of an inch thick. It should measure approximately 4.5 inches in diameter. Now, if I did a good job dividing this burger meat into equal pieces, they'll all be the same size. If I didn't, that's okay. If you have to choose between a 4.5 inch diameter and a 3/4 inch thickness, you want to favor the thickness. We want all these burgers to finish cooking at the same time, and they're most likely to do that if they're the same thickness. That's looking like it's about 3/4 of an inch thick. Let that hang out there and move on and shape the rest. All right, so that's our last patty. Now we have these perfectly shaped burgers. If I were to put these into a skillet and fry them up, the heat while we're searing that first side and developing that beautiful color, it's going to make the burgers contract, and as they shrink, the center's going to rise up almost like a little volcano. That little bump you get is going to mean that when you go to flip the burger, it's not going to rest evenly on the pan, it won't cook evenly, it won't brown evenly. To prevent that, what we're going to do is put a little divot in. It's going to be in the center of the burger, and I'm just using my thumb to gently press down. At this portion, the burger's going to be about a 1/2 inch thick. You can see how tender these are because the burgers are almost falling apart just from the pressure. Go ahead and use your other hand to help them maintain their shape. It's okay if they get a little bit wider as you're doing this. You just want to make sure they stay round. Because I've put this divot in the burger, when I go to sear it and it starts to shrink up and that center starts to rise, by the time the patty is ready to be flipped, we should be perfectly flat on top and so get a really great sear on the second side as well. All right, I'm gonna go wash my hands one last time and then we'll fry these up. Now, before we can start cooking these burgers, I wanna season them. I've got some salt here and I'm just gonna season the first side. I also wanna add a little bit of pepper, and then I'll flip these over and season the second side as well. You want to do this flipping very gently so that your patties don't fall apart. And then just a little bit more salt and pepper. I'm going to give these one more flip. When we go to cook these, we want the side that's really flat and will sit flush against the pan to be the side that hits the skillet first. I'm going to use a 12-inch conventional skillet to cook these burgers. I've got a teaspoon of oil in here, and I just want to crank the heat up to high and let this oil just come to smoking. One little trick for when you're trying to get a small amount of oil spread out evenly across your skillet, while that pan is cool and that oil's cool, it's not going to spread very evenly. You could spend a lot of time shaking it to kind of move that oil around, or you could just hang out, wait for the oil to heat up. It just moves a lot more readily. So my skillet is very evenly oiled at this point. It's starting to shimmer. I'm just waiting for the first wisp of smoke to appear, and that's my cue that the pan is hot enough for us to start cooking. And there, here we go. I'm going to slip these patties in one at a time. And it's okay if they're touching. They're going to tighten up. I want to give these patties 2 minutes to brown before I go to flip them. It's been about 2 minutes, so let's give these a flip. One thing you're going to notice as I'm flipping these, there's a good amount of fat in this pan, and I don't want to splatter it all over myself as I'm flipping. So after I lift the patty up, I like to tilt the pan a little bit to make sure the area where the patty's going to land is relatively fat-free. It just makes that flipping a little bit cleaner and safer. So we're going to give these patties another 2 minutes, and then they're going to come out of this pan and finish in the oven. It's been 2 minutes. I want to get these out of the pan. Now, these patties aren't quite done yet. They're almost there. I like to finish these in the oven rather than the skillet because the oven is going to be a little bit more gentle. We use the skillet to get a really nice crust on these. We'll let them finish gently in the oven. That's going to mean that the inside is going to stay extra juicy. Now is also a really good time to add cheese. The oven will do a great job of melting that cheese. You won't end up with cheese in your skillet that you'll have to scrape off later. And you can use whatever cheese you like. I'm going to use blue cheese in this case because I like it. And I want about an ounce of cheese per patty. That looks like about an ounce, maybe a little bit more, but that's okay. The really nice thing about burgers is that you don't have to make the same burger for everyone. You can really tailor it to your guests or your own taste. So I'm going to move this to a 300-degree oven to finish. I like my burgers at medium rare, so I'm going to take these to 125 degrees. If you like a medium burger, you're going to want to take it up to 130 degrees. The whole process will take anywhere between 3 to 6 minutes. These smell so good right now. There's kind of a faint whiff of butter, but mostly it's beefy and cheesy, and I can't wait to dive in. Before I do, I want to make sure they're fully cooked. Oh, nailed it. That's going to be a great burger. 126, perfect. Now, of course, you know how to build a burger, and you know what toppings you like. The one I'm going to build right now has that special sauce that we made earlier that echoes the flavors you'd find in a steak sauce. I also have some crispy shallots here, and you'll find that recipe in the class. We'll start with a little bit of sauce on the bottom. Well, okay, a lot of sauce on the bottom. One thing about burgers, it's really nice to let them rest just for a little bit. The juices in the burger, especially the juices at the surface where all that searing happened, that's where they're most prone to oozing out, and you want those juices to stay in that patty. So I like to pull them out, gather all of my stuff, and in the time it takes me to assemble everything, they'll have rested for just long enough. And then right on top, for a little bit of extra texture, crispy shallots. You can hear how crisp these shallots are. I can't wait to take a bite. Oh, this is going to be messy. It's messy already. Good burgers are messy, right? This is so good. There is so much going on in this burger. That patty is really beefy, and you're not going to get that flavor from store-bought ground beef. There's juiciness in the patty as well as juiciness from this sauce that is oozing all over the place in the best way. And there's just a little bit of freshness from that lettuce to kind of brighten it all up. Delicious. Starting with sirloin tips and grinding the meat yourself produces a burger that's fresh, juicy, and supremely beefy. Adding butter to the mix ensures that the burger is rich and flavorful before you even think about adding toppings. And using a two-step cooking process builds flavor and prevents overcooking. This is a burger you've got to try.
Now that you're on a roll, why not take the next step? Go to americastestkitchen.com/classes or download the America's Test Kitchen app to start learning with ATK classes today.